Mariah here with Thread and Maple, and in today's video I'd like to show you how to manage the magic loop. Magic loop is a technique used to make a small circumference. Typically you'll see it used for socks. In this case I have a sock. You can use this anytime you need to make a small circumference, like the crown of a hat, your sleeves on a sweater, even toys. And all that you need to do this is a long circular needle. So with any method for knitting a small circumference, I think the hardest part is the start. For the magic loop, you just need a long circular needle. My preference is a 32-inch circular needle. The first thing that you need to do, of course, is to cast on the stitches that you need. In my case, I'm casting on 64 stitches so I can start a sock. As you can see, the circle that I want to create for this sock is small, and it's not going to fit on the full length of these needles. The concept here is we're taking all of these stitches and we're splitting them in half. So we're creating a circle and we're going to be working on one half of that circle at a time. You're going to have all of the stitches on the cord. At the halfway point, you're going to bend the cord to the point where you can separate the stitches from either side of that cord and push them to one side or the other. And now that loop of cord there, we can pull on and guide those stitches so they're all on one side or the other. So the next part, we want to get set up. In order to manage all of the stuff going on here, if it's your first time doing magic loop, the first thing I suggest you do is just to get the stitches on the needles. So half of the stitches on one needle and half on the other. So now we have the stitches on the needles, and now we want to kind of figure things out and clean things up. I'm going to twist it so that the cast on edge is on the inside in between the needles. And so that looks nice and tidy, and I can see that we don't have anything twisted. And the next thing that you're going to do is you want to establish which is the back needle and which is the front needle. And to do that, you want to find the needle that has the working yarn attached to it. The working yarn needle is going to be your back needle. And what we want to do with that working yarn is just to make sure it is laying over top of that needle if your first stitch is going to be a knit stitch. If it is going to be a purl stitch, you do want it to be laying down kind of underneath. But for now, we're going to stick with the knit stitch. Yarn is going to be over top and out of the way. So this is the back needle. If for some reason you're trying to get established and your stitches are like this, and you notice that the front needle has the working yarn, then just flip it over. Now that we've established the front needle and the back needle, this front needle is going to end up being your left-hand needle. So that's the needle with all the stitches that you are going to be knitting. And this back needle is going to become your right-hand needle or your working needle. So now we just need to get these back stitches out of the way and off this back needle so we can use it. And the way we do that now is we're going to grab that back needle and pull. So all of the stitches on that back needle end up on the cord out of our way, okay? So I like to pull until I have enough room to work with this right needle, because I need to bring this right needle to the front so I can work into these stitches on my left needle. And those back stitches are just going to hang out on that cord out of the way. So now I'm just going to grab that front needle like I would my left needle, and I'm going to ignore those stitches on the back needle, and now I'm just going to start working into that first stitch. And then when joining in the round, that first stitch can have that gapping. I'm going to wrap my working yarn around my needle, and when I go to pull, I'm going to pull tight so that the cord presses up against the needle, and I want to maintain that tension so that cord stays there, and that's going to help bridge that gap. I do like to then, for the second stitch, I put a little tighter, but then it's important for the rest of your stitches to just have your normal tension. So now we are just going to work across the first half of the stitches in our small circumference circle. So I'm making it to the end of the stitches that are on my left needle. So here I'm working the last stitch. And so now there are no longer any stitches on my left needle. I have successfully worked the first half. So now we need to do a bit of adjustment. I think if it's your first time doing magic loop, good to just go ahead and get those back stitches back on their needle. Things are a little bit more stable this way when they're on the needles. What you are now going to do is we're turning our work. And so you are going to just rotate your needles clockwise. so that they're pointing now to the right, and make sure everyone is pointing in the direction they're supposed to be pointing. And then you're going to look for your working yarn, and you want to make sure that the working yarn is coming from that back needle, and we can pull out that back needle. We're going to keep the stitches on this front needle. We're going to pull so we have enough room, enough cord to move that right needle around. You're going to keep this is called a dog ear. You're going to maintain that dog ear. And then we're going to now just work across these stitches. This is the second half of our circle. You don't have to pull very tight here. Again, I just like to make sure that the cord comes close to the needle when I pull. And so now I'm getting to the end of the round. Once again, things are being pulled kind of crazy. You can see this big gap here. I still like to go ahead and get those stitches that were on the cable in the back on the needle. So things are on the needles, looks a little bit crazy, but I just want to clean things up. I know that I need to rotate clockwise. I see my back needle has my working yarn, and I do see this gap here. We're going to do one more round. I'm going to pull out that back needle. I'm going to go into this first stitch, and then once again, I'm going to wrap my yarn around and pull so that, do you see how the cord comes and touches the needle? And again, maintaining that tight tension, maintaining it in the second stitch, and then resuming your normal knitting tension for the rest of the stitches. And you can see here, as I've moved along from the beginning of the round, that the laddering has improved just from the tension. So after you've made it through the struggle of starting working in the round with Magic Loop, the next challenge is with laddering. Now, anytime you're knitting a small circumference, you're going to have a challenge with laddering. Anytime you're taking that circle and splitting it, whether it's in half or Magic Loop with double pointed needles and quarters, you're going to have some challenges with maintaining tension between the gaps. We talked about the tensioning at the beginning of the round a little bit more, especially when you first start joining in the round. But there's something else that I like to do that I call shifting your stitches. So what I've done here is I do now have a stitch marker on my cord, and that is marking the beginning of the round. And you'll notice it's hanging out on the cord itself. The needles are also establishing the beginning of the round. So when I switch from the back part of the circle to the front part of the circle, that also indicates the beginning of the round. And you can use a stitch marker, but in this case, it's kind of annoying because it's going to fall off when I get to it. What we can do is, instead of relying on our needles to tell us when the beginning of the round is, or even our tail, we can use stitch markers. And then this trick also helps with managing those ladders. So I'm going to get to the end of the first half of this circle. Now I'm going to shift my stitches. So before I had you put all of the stitches back on their respective needles, now I'm going to have you just shift the stitches onto the cable. And we're going to do that until we actually pull that dog ear all the way through. So I'm going to keep pulling. The cable is going to pop in. And now I have a completed circle, and I have my stitch marker in place, marking where the beginning of that round is right here. Instead of relying on pulling this cord through here and the cord split kind of telling me where the beginning of round is, I'm going to rely on that stitch marker. And so that means I can shift where I pull this cord out, really wherever I want. So you can already kind of see maybe that the space between the stitches right at the cord is kind of big. So what I like to do is to pick some stitches that maybe look closer together, like right here. You can come before or after the stitch marker, it's your choice. And I'm shifting where the magic loop is going to pull through, so that now my stitch marker is on the cord in between stitches, so it is not just hanging out in this dog ear, and that means it's not going to fall off. That also means that this is not the beginning of my round. Where the stitch marker is the beginning of my round. Going to turn my needles clockwise, get everyone where they belong. So I've pulled out my right needle, and I'm just going to continue working across. So now I'm here getting to the stitch marker, and just like I would normally, I'm going to move the stitch marker over. There's a little bit of gapping here. This is going to help solve that problem, because now all of the tension is being pulled between these two stitches and not where the beginning of round is, where we were seeing that gapping. As we readjust, all that tension is going to be put here, and those are going to be pulled apart, and those could potentially get a little bit of laddering. And so what's going to happen here is we're going to be fixing that laddering that may have been happening at the beginning of round, and now we're putting it here, and then later you can shift again. So I hope that this was helpful for you to learn how to use the magic loop. And if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to let us know in the comments.